Nora. Check the light first.
Can people hear me? Does that work? Yeah, great, okay.
Right. Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between. I said good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between. Thank you very much. This will be an interactive event. You can squirt later, but not for the moment, please. So, the question is, why are we all gathered here? We are protesting specifically about the Digital Economy Bill and its provisions for age verification around adult pornography. So, there is a serious concern that the regulator who's already been appointed, which is the British Board of Film Censorship, have been appointed as a regulator without any privacy or security safeguards. That means that your private sexual details, should you choose to be age verified, will be on a database by a third party that the state may have access to, which is very prone to personal data leakage in an Ashley Madison style hack. This is absolutely terrifying that there are no privacy or security requirements created under the bill as it stands. Not only this, but it may disadvantage sexual minorities with regards to certain types of material being created that are much harder to access going underground as a consequence. Finally, this is utterly impractical. It is a law that has no rationale behind it because it can be obviated incredibly easy by using proxies, VPN, Tor, simply to get around it. They say that safety is a click away. Well, now pornography is 3 clicks away. Well done. Finally, this material will be 18+ rated material, so therefore ancillary providers would include Twitter and the search engines. That means that you may have to age verify even if you don't mean to look at pornography. Simply looking at a search engine may be sufficient. So without further ado, I'd like to just introduce our speakers very quickly by name, and then we will bring them on. So after my colleague and co-organiser Nora Blake has spoken, we should be hearing from Jodie Ginsburg from Index on Censorship, Wendy Grossman from the Open Rights Group. Jim Killock sends his apologies. He's got a feeble excuse of being in Belgium doing privacy work. Guy Herbert from No to ID, speaking in a personal capacity. Professor Chris Ashford and Professor Clarissa Smith. Justin Hancock, the Sex Workers Opera and the English Collective of Prostitutes, and finally David Bridle from Boys Magazine. We also have apologies from Natalie Bennett and from Big Brother Watch, who are unable to attend. So, without further ado, I'd like to start by telling you a legal joke.
I love jokes!
A man walks into a court. He's charged under Section 63 of the Criminal Justice and Immigration Act 2008 with an offence of extreme pornography for allegedly being in possession of a video of a woman having sex with a tiger. This video has never been watched by the prosecution. Nonetheless, he's been arrested at his home address. Police have executed a warrant, taken him to the police station, interviewed him under caution, where he has been represented by a solicitor. He's been bailed to the magistrates' court and then sent to the Crown Court. Finally, at the Crown Court, the judge asks to see the material in an administrative hearing. There's a moment of extreme terror across the court as they expect to see a woman having sex with a tiger. Play is pressed. Turns out it's a man in a tiger skin costume who turns to the camera and says, "That beats advertising Frosties for you." Now, if this isn't ridiculous, this ruined a man's life. He became a joke. The story went viral across the global internet, and his life was ruined because this law was misunderstood. So what I'm saying to you is there is a significant risk of this happening to any one of you here today as a consequence of these misconceived laws. And on that note, I would like to hand over to my co-organiser, Nora Blade.
Thanks, Miles. Should we put these placards back up? They're falling down. I'm just going to reinstate the placards. They're a bit floppy. Hello. Look at you all, you're beautiful. So, for those of you who may or may not know me, I'm Nora Blade. I'm a feminist pornographer, sex worker and sexual liberties campaigner. And thank you. And I've organised this protest with Miles because not only is the Digital Economy Bill that's currently going through Parliament an outrageous attack on our sexual freedoms and personal privacy, but because the laws around sex, porn and obscenity in this country are massively overdue for review. And we need to demand a root and branch review of the Obscene Publications Act and the BBFC classification guidelines on which the Digital Economy Bill relies. So, I don't know if, So I run a spanking website, a feminist spanking website called dreamsorspanking.com, shameless plug. And it was unsuccessfully censored last year under similar legislation, the AVMS regulations, which some of you may have protested against in 2014 in this very spot at the face-sitting protest. Now, thankfully, after a lengthy ordeal, my appeal to Ofcom was successful and I was able to reopen the site. But a mere 4 weeks later, the Digital Economy Bill was presented to Parliament and I realised that my website was going to be criminalised all over again. Now, just to give you some context, I like spanking. I always have. I know, I mean, it's great, right? What's not to like? It's queer, it's non-penetrative, you can do it with people you might not want to have sex with, it gets your circulation going and your endorphins flowing, it's fantastic, you get to role play and dress up, which I love. I've known that I like spanking since I was about 6 years old, when I first read Roald Dahl's autobiography about getting caned at boarding school, and my 6-year-old self was sort of under the duvet, getting very excited and thinking, oh my God, I wonder if this would ever happen to me. I knew instinctively that I should never tell anyone that I had this fantasy, that I should be ashamed of it, and I never mentioned it to anybody. And as I entered puberty, I started to wonder if I would ever find love and if I would ever find a partner who wanted to do this with me in real life. It wasn't until I got online in the 90s and found some free previews for online pornography, which I wasn't legally old enough to buy access to, that I realised there were other people in the world who had the same fantasy, and I wasn't the only kinky pervert on the planet. It made me realise that maybe I wasn't such a freak, that I didn't have to feel ashamed, and that I might find happiness and fulfilment after all. So this is one of the reasons I make pornography, is to help people who maybe are isolated in rural communities, who don't know that there might be a BDSM scene, to realise that they aren't alone and that there's nothing wrong with them. I don't think that as adults any of us deserve to be made to feel ashamed of our sexualities. You know, I'm bisexual, I fancy men and women and people in between, and I can't help that. And I can't help that I fantasise about BDSM and spanking either, it's just the way I am. And to criminalise people like me and people like you and tell us that we're obscene, that our sexualities are harmful to society, is shocking and it's absurd. So the Digital Economy Bill, as well as all of the privacy problems which Miles has enunciated so well, recriminalises me and my website Dreams of Spanking and the websites of countless other fetish and alternative and indie, DIY, alternative pornography producers in the UK because it applies the BBFC classification guidelines for what content is legal to depict in porn to the internet. Now, the highest online porn, well, the highest pornography category is R18, and that's the category that it goes into if it's got real sex in it. And there's a long, long list of things that it's illegal to include or to classify as R18, including fisting, female ejaculation is what it's normally referred to, but ejaculation from someone who owns a vulva, face sitting, spanking that leaves marks, bondage if you've got both your wrists tied, your gags, and you've got your ankles bound, and a whole host of other activities which are completely legal to perform in real life. So there's this discrepancy between what it's legal to do and what it's legal to depict, which is completely nonsensical and absolutely helps no one. And I find this particular list of banned activities particularly offensive as a vulva owner, as a woman, as a queer person, because I don't like being told that my orgasm is obscene. The way that my body naturally and authentically responds to pleasure is obscene and is too extreme to be depicted in porn because it might harm children. I don't like being told that if my lover puts their hand inside me, even if their hand's tiny, that this incredibly intimate act of sex is obscene, is violent, is harmful, is degrading. And I think that the reason these things are banned isn't some sort of conspiracy, it's just that our sex laws, our porn laws are massively out of date. Ultimately, these prohibitions derive from the Obscene Publications Act, a piece of legislation that was brought out in 1959, when it was still illegal to have gay sex. It is absolutely absurd that this legislation should still be controlling what we can do with our bodies, what we can do with our sexualities, and the kind of sex that we can fantasize having. So I think we demand a joint committee reviewing our obscenity laws from scratch, going right back to the OPA. We demand a review of the classification guidelines that the BBFC use to control what content can and can't be depicted legally. And we want these guidelines brought up to date with current public opinion and with UK case law. I mean, my colleague Miles, the rock star lawyer over here, represented the defence in 2 trials in 2012, which were about content depicting things like anal fisting and male BDSM. And in both of those trials, a jury of the British public unanimously ruled that these acts were not obscene. Now, if that isn't an indication of what the British public currently thinks, then I don't know what is. And there's meant to be some sort of legal system on which the guidance is updated in the wake of this case law, but it hasn't been updated. So if a new piece of legislation like the Digital Economy Bill is going to be brought in March, then at the very least we need these guidelines to be reviewed before that happens, so that the law isn't any more out of date than it currently is. The bottom line is that none of us deserve to feel ashamed of our sexualities or of what our bodies naturally do when we have sex. None of us deserve to feel ashamed of what we fantasize about or the kind of sex we have, as long as it's consensual. Consensual adult sex should not be criminalized, and nor should any porn that depicts it. And I'm going to leave it there and hand over to our next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pandora Blake. And next we have, from the legendary Index on Censorship, who have been campaigning on free speech issues for an enormous amount of time, Jodie Ginsburg, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, Miles is right. Index on Censorship has been campaigning for free speech and against censorship for 44 years. And frankly, our job is to make ourselves out of business as soon as possible. We would like to see an end to censorship. And it's sad that we still, in 2016, find ourselves campaigning against censorship in the United Kingdom. All the things Pandora said are things that I essentially want to echo. It's interesting, obviously today there's quite a lot of bondage gear on display, but the kind of restraints that Index on Censorship is interested in are government restraints. They're the restraints that the government and its regulator imposes on the activities of consenting adults engaged in legal sexual activity. And it's, to me, utterly ludicrous, frankly, that in 2016 we should have regulation on what consenting adults can do and what they can watch. And Pandora's entirely right in that the digital economy bill will, if you like, crystallize some of these regulations and make it incredibly difficult to overturn and change in future, and we need to look at them now. And the last thing I would say is that it's often seen that privacy and free expression are somehow mutually exclusive, that if you want free expression, you're somehow anti-privacy. Not at all. It's absolutely vital that we maintain the privacy of individuals, that we protect the vulnerable, but that we maintain the privacy of individuals in order to be able to express ourselves freely. Not everybody wants to be out in public. Some people want to be able to do these things in the privacy of their own home, and provided that it's legal and that both parties are consenting, there's absolutely no reason why that shouldn't be allowed to happen. And then my final point would also be that free expression is about making sure that all of us can express ourselves. It's not simply so that the mainstream narrative can be repeated. And currently, as the regulations stand, what we get is a sort of sanitized version of what sexuality looks like in a largely heterosexual world where everybody conforms to certain views of the norm. And a world in which the government gets to decide whether or not female ejaculation can be seen is not really one that I think particularly we want to live in. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm really, really proud that we've got such a serious, heavyweight civil liberties and human rights organisation speaking on our behalf. Next up, we have Wendy Grossman speaking on behalf of the Open Rights Group. Oops. It's all right.
The BBFC has...
Wendy, up with the mic, please.
The BBFC has a long history in content classification, but it has no history or expertise in cybersecurity or the mechanisms by which we protect privacy. A couple of weeks ago, several of us went to a demonstration event to show what the mechanisms for verifying age might look like. And it was really noticeable. There were several common types. One was that they would use payment providers to provide proof of age, which is something that payment systems are not designed to do and probably won't welcome. Another was to allow them to rummage through your social media profile in order to establish the likelihood that you were over 18. And a third approach was to require a government document and compare that to a photograph that you sent live. Now, one of the worst proposals was a single sign-on for pornographic websites all over the place. So can you imagine the equivalent of Pornbook would be sitting there knowing everything you looked at, everything you wrote, everything you were interested in. And I think it was this guy who started talking wistfully about wishing that the government would open up the passport database to help with age verification and the DVLA database. So all of a sudden you're talking about not the system that the government says it wants, which is one where the site merely knows whether or not you're over 18 but not who you are, to a system where everything is known and surveilled and linked to your real world identity. And there are all sorts of reasons why you should oppose that. Ashley Madison has provided a great example. It's a huge target for hackers, and it's, speaking as somebody who writes a lot about cybersecurity, it's just a really terrible idea. And don't think that it will merely apply to people who look at porn, because if these systems start to encroach on other databases, it will affect everyone who's in any database. What do I have? And we know at this point, we do know from internet history that people will make silly decisions in order to look at porn. I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember the Anna Kournikova virus, which was one of the first things that came out on the internet, but people clicked on this malware because they thought they would get to see a nude photo of Anna Kournikova, who was considered hot stuff at the time. So, people make bad decisions in these situations, and so the law has to protect them from the results of those decisions. It can't just assume that data protection law will cover everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Wendy, on behalf of the Open Rights Group. And next up, we have Professor Chris Ashford speaking on a personal note Thank you very much, Chris.
Good morning everyone, or good afternoon now. I'm a professor of law and society, and every law student across the country all studies one case from the 1990s. It's the case of Brown. Some of you might know it as the Spanner case. It's a case that every student studies as a homophobic case, an outdated case, a silly case, but a case that is still law in this country. And it's a case that criminalises consensual adults for engaging in sexual behaviour. This case has its roots in a law from 1861. That's the year that Prince Albert died. That's the year that Queen Victoria went on for another 40 years in mourning. And that case in the 1990s that was passed by a court that used to sit in that building just there, that court no longer exists. The judges that sat in that case are dead, and yet that law continues to criminalise consensual adults in this country. It's an outmoded law, it's an outdated law, and it's a law that frankly needs to go and needs to be reformed. Miles gave me strict orders that I had to speak for 2 minutes, so I think that's pretty on the nail.
Thank you for endorsing my strictness, Chris. Thank you very much indeed, Clarissa. Next up we have Professor Clarissa Smith. Round of applause, please.
Okay, thank you. So I'm actually going to say just a little bit about the research base that underpins this kind of legislation. Like all of the other forms of legislation that have been targeting pornography over the last decade, this one claims to have a research base that demonstrates that there are issues for children and that there's an issue of safety for children with regard to pornography. The fact is that that research base doesn't exist, that the government doesn't in fact want to have research that might demonstrate that people who engage with pornography are doing something which is complex, really sometimes very creative for them, and definitely has very much more significant understanding or impacts on their lives than the ways in which government talks about it. We've seen law going through, which Miles talked about at the start of our speeches, that have been illiberal and frankly culturally illiterate, and they've resulted in people's lives being ruined. And what we've got now is a situation where children are supposedly being protected by this particular law, but it's a law that refuses to recognise that young people have very little opportunity for getting to grips with who they are sexually, where they might want to envisage themselves in coming years as a sexual person. And in fact it's about the fear of children becoming sexual and becoming actively sexual as they grow into adults. And the problem is that while they continue to use the common sense idea that we all know what pornography does, how people engage with pornography, we don't have a full and rounded communication or debate about what it might mean to be humanly sexual at this point in time. And that has real implications for young people. And that's where I hope we're going to go next in our talk.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Clarissa Smith. Next up on a similar issue, we have Justin Hancock of Fish Training UK. Justin Hancock!
Hey, thank you for coming. There are so many problems with this bill that everyone's articulating really well. And I think the whole idea that porn is harmful to young people is kind of what this bill I think is about. That's like the only rationale it seems to have. And as Clarissa was saying, it's much more complicated than that. But also this idea that some of the kind of problems that we have in sex and relationships and young people have only kind of existed since online porn became a thing that young people could access. It's just complete nonsense. And I've been working with young people since before the internet became widely available to people, and I used to work with young men who would say, who cares whether she's enjoying it or not, so long as I'm enjoying it. So these kinds of things have been around since before the internet. So it's just this argument that it's somehow protecting young people isn't true. And also, as Miles was saying, young people are going to find a way around it anyway. For young people who actively want to engage with porn, they're going to find ways around it. It's also not going to prevent problematic use of porn. It's not going to prevent a young person downloading an image to their phone and then sending that to somebody else without their consent. So it's not going to deal with that as an issue. There's potential where it might actually affect some content online which may actually be providing sex and relationships education. Filters in the past have affected my website, for instance. But also what we're really, really crying out for, and what young people are crying out for, is just better sex ed. Better sex and relationships education. Something where young people, bang on, something where people get to think about their relationships with themselves, what is expected of them in society, gender and sexuality, have their relationships with other people, but also putting consent at the heart of this. Like, if young people, getting young people to think about, or getting all of us to think about, what it is we may actually enjoy and what we may actually want to do, rather than what we feel like we have to do. And that's the kind of sex education we need. We've been crying out for this for years and years and years. It needs to be funded, it needs to be supported, and it needs to happen yesterday. And this bill is just a distraction from the real issues. Thank you all very much.
Justin Hancock, everyone. Thank you very much indeed, Justin. And if I can introduce next David Bridle, who is the editor of Boys and Dirty Boys magazines. Thank you very much indeed, David.
Thank you, Miles. And Miles, of course, is our lawyer for Dirty Boys magazine, which I'm always very grateful for. I'm going to read, if you don't mind, from my notes. The impact of these rules mean that the ability of young lesbian and gay, bisexual and trans people to access education, information, advice and knowledge about their sexuality will be directly affected by this law. Many young gay people, LGBT people, use sites like Twitter, Tumblr and Snapchat as their way of coming to terms with their sexuality, slowly discovering and exploring. The plan is to include such sites as these under the verification rules. What about Gay Men Fighting AIDS or the Terence Higgins Trust with their information on keeping people safe from HIV? Are those kind of education sites going to be affected by these rules if they have a picture of somebody putting a condom on, for instance, which is very important education? The LGBT community, and gay men in particular, have suffered disproportionately from our draconian obscenity and sex laws. In 2012, Simon Walsh had his life turned upside down, openly gay barrister who lost his job with the Mayor of London after tabloid stories, but who was eventually found by a wise jury to be not guilty of possessing extreme pornography. And those wise 12 good men on that jury decided that the images that the CPS and police were prosecuting him on, which were things like sounding and fisting images, were not actually obscene. The same with Michael Peacock in front of us, the gay escort, who was found not guilty of distributing gay pornography DVDs of S&M, fisting, water sports. But I want to make one very simple point about fisting and water sports, two of these things which are highly illegal under British law, but actually both of which from an HIV perspective are entirely safe from HIV. So essentially what we're doing is we are stopping young gay men from learning and seeing about the very things which could keep them safe from HIV. I think it's time for a grown-up debate in the UK, and I think it's time for the police, the CPS and the government to start treating us as the sexually mature adults that we are. Society will gain.
Thank you very much indeed, David. If you could give the microphone to the next speaker, who is Nora Watson from the English Collective of Prostitutes. Nora Watson, everyone!
Hi everyone, thank you very much for having us. I'm going to read as well because this is a collective effort, so I can't remember everyone's points. So just for those of you that don't know us, we are sex workers working in all areas of the sex industry, campaigning for decriminalisation and the removal of the prostitution laws. And like sex workers all over the world, we're fighting for the right to work, but also the right not to work in the sex industry if we don't want to. We want labour rights, including occupational health and safety rights, but we also fight for alternatives, so against the cuts and for alternatives and resources so that any of us can leave if and when we want to. So we're delighted to be here, thank you for having us, and we support the campaign against the Digital Economy Bill, which, as has been said, is going through Parliament at the moment. And this campaign we definitely see as part of our struggle as sex workers, because the bill would basically put the power into the hands of the bosses, away from independent filmmakers and performers. And this is exactly what the criminalisation of sex work does to sex workers, because we're pushed into the hands of exploitative bosses because it's not legal to set up your own place or work where you want to work, because we can't work collectively with others. This bill also increases surveillance on clients by demanding that clients have to give particular details about themselves, which most will not want to do. And why do they need all this information anyway, as has already been said? Again, putting the independent filmmakers and performers more at risk, because it's them who are going to go out of business. But in a similar vein, some MPs, particularly women MPs who call themselves feminists, want to criminalise sex workers' clients. And not only we're against this completely, not only will it impact sex workers financially, it will also, worse than that, make it much more dangerous for sex workers to work and force us into isolation. So what we wanted to particularly focus on is, what are the women MPs saying about all this? Why aren't they interested in the fact that this is a bill going through and there are other proposals going through that put women also in particular into danger, into the power into the hands of bosses, and make the workers work longer for less money? Why don't they have anything to say about it? It's disgraceful. We've also seen that censorship, for example, there was a clampdown on the cards, sex workers' cards in phone boxes, is just an occasion for racism, because the first cards that they go for are the migrant women or the women of colour. They take them off first, so it's just an occasion for them to target people of colour. And the feminists, of course, have nothing to say about it. They also have nothing to say about the fact that more women in particular are going into the sex industry because of benefit cuts and sanctions, and we are very concerned about that, but they have nothing to say about it. So they do not represent us, basically. And we just wanted to say also that there are many bills going through, there are many pieces of legislation that are politically and economically repressive, especially at this time and this government, but even the last government really. And this bill is just a part of all of that. It's just a part of a repressive state, basically, which tries to undermine the relationships that the fight that we have to make relationships that we want and contact that we want with other people. That's what they're trying to stop. The anti-porn lobby has consistently said that that pornography is the theory and rape is the practice, and we say it's completely wrong. It's the other way around, and actually anti-porn is the theory and repression is the practice. I'm nearly finished. Wrapping up. So that's why we need decriminalisation. Just to say what we're working on at the moment, if anybody wants to get involved, we're an active group. We have a petition here which you can sign. You can sign it online to decriminalise sex work for safety's sake. You may or may not know the Home Affairs Select Committee just came out in support of decriminalising sex workers, which we have to, as a movement, have to make sure that they stick to, and that they don't include the criminalisation of clients in those recommendations. We have an event next month if anyone is interested in that. Some of us are supporting Jeremy Corbyn because he has stood for decriminalisation and committed to society where we're not automatically criminalised and he's always worked on the side of workers. We also have a rights sheet for sex workers which outlines the laws, so if anyone wants to get involved, speak to me afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed to Nora Watson for the English Collective of Prostitutes. Thank you, Nora. Thank you. And next up we have Guy Herbert from No to ID. Guy Herbert, everyone!
Hello, everybody. Miles, in his opening remarks, said I was speaking in a personal capacity. I'll say this much in a personal capacity before I get on to my official position as General Secretary of No to ID, and that is that I personally am wholly in support of Pandora's and Miles's campaign for the complete revision of Britain's ramshackle and regressive sex laws. But speaking as General Secretary of No to ID, I don't have any corporate position to offer on censorship. I don't care what you get up to at the weekend or what you do for work. What bothers me is the tying of individuals to a single identity, the collection of information about you while you're going about your lawful business. If you can forget the sexual context for a minute and just think about going out for a drink on a Saturday night, you might encounter somebody on the door who says, "ID please," and you say, "I don't need to show ID, I just need to prove that I'm over 18. "Oh no, you have to show ID because the